Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us for today's event. My name is Marielle Villeray. I'm the Program Development Director for the Office of Academic Initiatives and Strategic Innovation here at the Graduate Center. And I'm so pleased to co-present with Copland House this series of musical performances and conversations under the title Underscored. We've had several concerts and programs throughout the year, and we have many more scheduled, so I hope you'll join us for those. Today's performance is particularly important and meaningful as it was composed by Amy Beach, a female composer who really cracked the glass ceiling in a male-dominated field at the time that she was working, as well as through today, really. So we're really pleased to present this, and Michael Bariskin will tell you more about the music in particular. But before we get started with that, I just want to remind you that we're using the Zoom webinar function today, and you can submit your questions using the Q&A button on the bottom register of your screen. You can submit those at any time throughout the performance and the program, and they'll be brought into the Q&A portion of today's program after the performance. So please contribute your voice and your questions. We look forward to the conversation. And here's Michael Bariskin, Artistic and Executive Director of Copland House, to tell us more about the music. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to Underscored, our showcase for American music past and present. I'm Michael Bariskin. I'm the Artistic and Executive Director of Copland House, and I am so glad to greet you from the living room in Aaron Copland's longtime home. We're especially delighted to have you join us today when we turn the clock way back to the dawn of the 20th century and feature a really remarkable composer and an exceptional piece of music. The composer is Amy Beach, who is nowhere near as well known as she should be, but was probably the first American woman to gain widespread acclaim both across the US and abroad in the late 19th and early 20th centuries as a composer. And the composition we're spotlighting today is likewise much too little known, but it's a real landmark in American Romantic era chamber music. Her grand and opulent Quintet for Piano and Strings from 1907, certainly one of Beach's truly magnificent works. It's in three movements that always seem to be trying to balance decorum and fervor. The first movement is portentous and mercurial. The middle movement is sublime and ecstatic. And the finale is brilliant and all out breathless. Before we hear the performance, I'm really glad to speak a bit about the music with Graduate Center Professor Jennifer Oates, whose scholarly work has focused on women in music, among other subjects, and also with one of Music from Copland House's principal artists, Curtis Macomber, who is one of the most versatile and expressive violinists around today. Please be sure to stay with us after the performance when Jennifer, Kurt, and I will be back to take as many of your questions as we can in our live Q&A. Hi, Jennifer. Hi, Kurt.
Hi, Michael.
Thanks for joining us. Our series here ranges pretty widely across the 20th century. Today's program is going to reach far back into the dawn of the 20th century. And I think it's fair to say that the piece that we're featuring today, the major work that we're featuring today, is almost certainly by any accounts the most traditional work that we've done. And yet the backstory of this piece is anything but traditional, because the composer of this work was a woman at the dawn of the 20th century, which to me, Jennifer, makes this a rather remarkable story of, what do we want to say, determination and focus. So maybe we can start by talking a little bit about who Amy Beach was.
Sure. Yes, Amy Beach was remarkable. She was one of the best known, if not the best known, female composer at the turn of the 20th century. And what's interesting about her is she made her name with her songs, but it was really once her mass and her symphony came out in the 1890s that she became very well known, not just in America, but also in Europe, particularly Germany. And during her lifetime, most of her works were published and performed, which is also remarkable, something that her fellow male American composers didn't always enjoy. So that was really remarkable. And she was great at promoting her works in a very understated way. Another interesting fact about her is that her music today, about 2/3 of it is recorded. So she remains pretty popular. She got her start as a prodigy. Her mother was a pianist and singer. So her mother started teaching her piano early, but she was improvising alto lines against her mother's soprano singing at age 2. She taught herself to read at age 3. At age 4, she starts writing her own piano music and improvising at the piano. And by age 7, she had her first public recital. When they moved to Boston in 1875, she had her big Boston debut at age 16. And then 2 years later, she had her premiere with the Boston Symphony Orchestra playing, major concertos and such. It's interesting, in that year, she also married Dr. Beach, who taught anatomy at Harvard and was also a practicing doctor.
And therein lies the problem.
Yes, right. Now it's interesting because he was relatively progressive for his time. He had been following her career since she moved to Boston and was very supportive of her music. But he did ask that once they got married, she refrained from performing in public except for charity events. But he encouraged her to compose. So she did continue to compose. Now, as a composer, she was completely self-taught. She had piano lessons. She had a brief year of harmony study with a private teacher. But other than that, she read treatises on orchestration, including the one by Berlioz. She would listen to music, write down what she thought she heard, then compare it with the score. She was completely self-taught in that respect. And I think that makes her music all the more interesting. So gets married in 1885. She writes her first big work, which was her Mass in E major, Opus 5. It was premiered in 1892 by the Handel and Haydn Society in Boston. Then she writes her Gaelic Symphony, which was premiered in 1896 by the Boston Symphony Orchestra, which is a pretty big deal in and of itself. And the major male composers of the day basically said, well, she's one of the boys because that symphony was such a success. She did write a piano concerto and perform it while she was married. That was a little unusual, but her composing was taking off, but her piano career had stopped. And it's interesting to note that in 1910, Dr. Beach died. So she's now a widow. And a year later, her mother died. And at that point, she began planning a tour of Europe. And in 1914, she took off to Europe, was promoting her works, her piano concerto, her piano quintet, which we'll hear today, as well as sonata for violin and piano, excuse me. And she was well received in Europe, and that really helped solidify her international career. And from that point on, she starts rebuilding her piano career and continuing to compose. And of course, World War I interferes with that tour. She settles in New York when she gets back to the US and continues a very illustrious career until her death in 1944. So she's very fascinating and wrote a lot of works. And I actually love the piano quintet, and I'm super excited to hear the piece today.
Well, and Kurt, let's talk about the piano quintet, which has always left me sort of breathless in its grandeur and opulence. Tell us a bit about this piece. This is no little throwaway work. It's a major piece, isn't it?
Yeah, this is grand romanticism. The work is about a half an hour long. It's in 3 big movements, but the whole format, and the effect of it is symphonic at times. To that end, actually, she often will group the strings as one unit, playing unison or octave passages as a counterbalance to the big piano. Of course, she was a virtuoso pianist, so the piano is all over the place, and it's a huge, very virtuosic piano part. And the strings to match that are often put in octaves and as a group. It's very satisfying to play this music. It's the soaring lines, the very intimate solos that each of us has throughout the piece. It's wonderful to perform. The beginning of the piece, actually, I talked about the grouping of the strings. The very beginning of the piece is an octave, F sharp, very suspended, held kind of feel, which becomes gradually kind of mournful. And remember that music that we hear at the beginning, because it's going to come back 2 more times. And it's sort of a place marking for the beginning of the development of the first movement, but also in the last movement, she brings back much of the music from the first movement. So it's sort of cyclical in that way. And it's a nice way of binding the piece together.
And what can we say about the middle movement, that slow oasis in a way?
Yeah, it's gorgeous. One significant thing to point out is that she has these strings play with mutes on at the beginning of the slow movement. So you get the effect of sort of a hushed prayer, a chorale. The mutes stay on for about half of that movement, and then the music comes to sort of a crisis point. There's a big, very extended piano solo that heads things in a certain direction, and during that solo, the mutes come off. We play a lot of the same music without mutes, but the effect is entirely different. It's freed, it's released, it's released.
I mean, I don't know if you guys agree. I mean, for me, the second movement especially comes out of this world that kind of merges Wagner and Brahms, late 19th century Germanic romanticism, and especially just the shape of the slow movement has these, this kind of expressive ebb and flow where the music grows and subsides and grows and subsides. I mean, it is so rich and voluptuous, and she seems to me fully in control.
Agreed. And this music can edge on saccharine if it's taken to above a certain point, and she never does that. It's always comes across as very genuine, very sincere expression, and very, as Michael is explaining, very ecstatic much of the time, and intimate, very fine music.
We're really excited about this piece. We are excited about Amy Beach, and we look forward to this performance. We always look forward to playing this piece. I just want to say very quickly that our performers in the Music from Copland House Ensemble in this performance are Kurt as first violinist, and Siwoo Kim as second violinist. Catherine Lockwood is our violist. Alexis Pia Gerlach is the cellist. I'm the pianist. Please stay with us. We will all be back for a live Q&A. We think you'll probably have lots of questions and comments, and maybe you all can answer the question about why this piece has, until recently, been residing on the margins of the repertory. It's an extraordinary piece. Enjoy it. We'll see you later. Thanks for joining us. Well, welcome back to all of our viewers, and especially welcome to our live Q&A while we're all catching our collective breaths. I just wanted to remind everyone to please use the handy Q&A button at the bottom center of your screen and send us your questions because we'd love to hear what's on your mind and any comments and reactions as well as queries about this really extraordinary piece of music from America's Gilded Age. one other quick thing to mention, which is that this Q&A is being recorded. I have to say that. So anyway, we will stand by for your questions. In the meantime, I always kind of have two different thoughts and reactions whenever I hear this piece or whenever I play the piece. And I'm wondering, Kurt and Jennifer, what you all think about it. I hear the piece, I play it, and I am just taken away. I mean, it's almost literally a breathtaking experience for me to hear the piece, to hear this really magisterial, sovereign piece of music. On the one hand, what a glorious musical experience this is. On the other hand, I just wonder why. Why is this piece, why has this piece been relegated to the periphery of the repertory for so many years? I mean, one of you have the answer?
Don't
Or
have
any thoughts about it? Kurt, take it away.
And I don't have the answer. There is the canon of piano quintets, the Brahms, Dvorak, Schumann that everyone plays. I'm a big fan also of the Elgar Quintet, which is, I think, underplayed as well, from around the same era. It's just people know the pieces. Often the rehearsal situation is limited, so delving into a new piece can be difficult to schedule. We're lucky that we had the time to really study this and put it together.
Well,
For sure. Jennifer?
I have sort of an interesting alternate view. If you look at the other American composers from Amy Beach's time, she really is the best known today. George Whitefield Chadwick, John Knowles Payne, Horatio Parker, Edward McDowell. We don't really talk about them anymore. So on the one hand, she is underrepresented in the concert hall, recital hall, and so forth. I totally agree. But on the other hand, she's faring better than a lot of other American composers from the time. As for an answer as to why, I think it goes back to the canon again, and teaching what everybody knows. And I think in the music history world, the musicology world, that's starting to get broken down a bit, but it's hard to steer away from what we've been doing for so long.
Yeah, and I guess also the sort of generations long inferiority complex that the American music world has had for its own music, right? I mean, we all know, I mean, America's a young country, and for so many generations, the gatekeepers, the influencers, the deciders were all European by and large, in the largest orchestras and in the most prestigious performing arts organizations and presenters. And so much of our musical life has been centered around around European works. And, it just seems like, until as late as the 20s and 30s, when Copland and Harris and Roy Harris and Virgil Thompson started to develop more of an infrastructure for American music and get it pushed out onto the stage. It seems like, late 19th, early 20th century American music was kind of relegated to the edges of the canon and the American musical life, wouldn't you say?
True.
Yes. And part of it is you have to draw the crowds. The crowds want to hear the European music because that's what they know. So it's hard to get a foothold with new music. And the Europeans find American music interesting, but there's this balance of getting that foothold in. It's very difficult.
Yeah, which is bizarre to me, and I mean, it should, it robs us of all kinds of extraordinary musical experiences like this one. We've got, excuse me, a question from Judith, who wants to know if there's any chance we will perform Beach's Sonata for Violin and Piano. Kurt?
It's funny. It's funny you should mention that, because Michael and I have indeed performed it several times. I recorded it a long time ago. I was about to bring attention to that piece also, an underplayed masterpiece, much in the same vein as the quintet, big romantic piece. It should be much more standard part of the violinist piano repertoire.
Yeah, so Judith, the answer to your question is most likely yes. We'll get to it. The world is full of such uncertainties today with, with the pandemic obviously so affecting musical life, both live, obviously, but also even in the virtual realm that we're all living in. But Kurt and I both adore the Beach Violin Sonata. I think it's fair to say, Kurt, that we both think that it's one of her really extraordinary pieces in a very large catalog of music that she's written. But we sure hope to get to it and include it in this series. So please stay tuned. And when we get back to real life, I don't know if you're in the New York area, but we hope to see you at the Graduate Center's Elabash Hall when we may do this piece as well, both the quintet and the violin sonata. I mean, one of the other things that is remarkable, and Jennifer, you mentioned this in our talk before the performance, and it's really hard to remember that Amy Beach was largely self-taught as a composer, right? I mean, that makes this accomplishment even more mind-boggling.
Yes, yes. She had a brief year of harmony studies with a private tutor, but otherwise she was self-taught. Her mother, of course, was an amateur singer, pianist. So she grew up around music. There are stories that she started playing the piano and singing before she spoke. She was very much a prodigy. So there was a lot of innate talent but she also worked very hard to develop it with her studies. She would sometimes listen to music and write down what she heard, then compare what she'd written down with the score. So she really got into the nitty-gritty of the music, more so than I think maybe private studies would have gotten into. She worked very hard in her studies, and she did the same kind of thing in promoting her music, always kind of behind the scenes, because it wouldn't be appropriate as a woman to be too brash and up front. So she, aside from being a brilliant musician, brilliant pianist, she was also a rather smart businesswoman, and I find that fascinating myself.
A businesswoman in how? What do you mean?
In the sense of how she promoted her music. She was, when she went on her tour of Germany after her husband and mother died, it was all to reestablish her piano career and promote her music. Her music was the cornerstone of her recitals and performances there, and that really helped her career. And the same thing in the U.S. Whenever she performed, she often played at least one of her pieces. Obviously performing other works, particularly early on in her career, but she was pretty crafty about finding ways to get her music out there at a time when that was difficult even for men.
For sure. And I mean, from everything that I've read about her, what you said a bit about her suggests that she sounds like she was one of the really remarkable musical prodigies. I mean, it's not just somebody who, had an affinity for the piano, let's say, or composing, but I mean, as you said, she was doing this at a very, very young age, and was really prodigious, no?
Yes, that's correct. Yes. And some of the family moved to Boston for Amy to make sure that she had the education and the connections to the art world that she needed. So Boston was a very big musical center. So
It
moving
sure
there
was.
allowed her a bigger entree into the musical world, if you will, and allowed her to connect more with other significant musicians. In many ways, that was the musical center of the Northeast at that time, more so than New York initially.
For sure. And she was championed by no less than the Boston Symphony
Yes.
early on, which is, a pretty decent patron to have when you're a teenager.
Right.
My,
Yes.
my understanding was that it was de rigueur in those days for composers to go to Europe to study, American composers to travel to study in Europe, and she did not. Jennifer, I think you talked about this at some point, that there was a question of her doing that, and she was dissuaded, or what was the...
Right. So it was common for American women, particularly pianists, to go over and study in Germany. Women generally didn't go overseas to study composition because composition was still not considered an appropriate career for women, particularly women of a certain class. And Amy Beach was of a class where that was not appropriate.
Mhm.
So her family clearly dissuaded her just because of the ramifications it would have for the family. And this goes back to Clara Schumann, to Fanny Hensel. Clara Schumann was able to be a composer because she was more of a working class family, and she
Uh-huh.
started as a prodigy. And so starting as a prodigy makes it easier for women to get into the performance world and composition world. And then of course, Fanny Hensel, Mendelssohn's sister, really never was a public performer. All of her performances tend to be under her brother or within a more private venue, even though she was a brilliant composer as well. So gender plays a significant role in what these women were able to do in their careers. And
Well,
in that sense, Claire Schumann's remarkable because she did so much publicly at a time that was even less welcoming than Amy Beach's time.
well, and of course, Clara Schumann and Fanny Henselt uh, were both products of Central Europe. And that, as we know, is where the concert music tradition right. was centered.
Absolutely.
And so there's another disadvantage for Amy Beach, as for other composers, other American composers at the time, that, they were growing up amidst this relatively newly transplanted concert music tradition, and in a country that, as I said before, was a young country. And yes, usually the finishing happened in Europe. It's always instructive to remember that even the more prestigious colleges and universities in America, like Columbia and Harvard, didn't establish their first music professorships until like the last quarter of the 19th century. So you're quite right, people would turn to Europe. We have another question. This is from Mather, who I know to be in Washington, D.C. It's not a political question, so we're safe. But it's a long comment. Could another reason he's weighing in on the relative neglect of Beach, could another reason for the neglect of Beach be Copland's and Bernstein's own narrative, in quotes, of American classical music, that what preceded them was largely derivative of German music, not identifiably American, as their music was. And so they imply, not really all that interesting. I think that should probably be in quotes too. What do we think?
Well, I think that's absolutely a fair point. I'm also a scholar of British music, and this is a problem in Britain as well. Like the real music or the best music has German antecedents. And I think that's happening to a degree in America as well. And then, of course, the way music history is shaped, the narrative it takes, really dictates, for better or for worse, who's in the canon and who's talked about. And history has shown that women generally didn't make it into that narrative in a meaningful way. It was on the periphery. So I do, I'm not speaking specifically to this particular narrative, but I do think there is the narratives that are created around music history do create challenges, and who's creating those narratives and who gets to say what music belongs in the canon. Those are all kind of challenging questions that music historians grapple with on a regular basis. And we don't have answers.
No, no. Gee, I thought we were going to have all the answers we needed today.
Right.
I mean, it's interesting, the point that Mather brings up. And of course, it's a little bit complicated by the fact that we're dealing with different generations here. I mean, just in Mather's question, he's referencing three different generations: Beach, pre-Copland, by maybe two generations, even though their lives overlapped and their careers overlapped. But Amy Beach came of age in the late 19th century. And then Copland's generation and Bernstein's generation is already the next one after Copland. And yeah, I mean, there was obviously this big push among some composers of Copland's generation to create what Copland called a recognizably American musical idiom. I think it just goes back to the fact to the really Eurocentric nature of the American music scene for so long. I mean, as you said, Jennifer, people like Arthur Foote and George Chadwick, even Charles Griffiths, who was a bit later, but still, sort of straddling the turn of the 20th century. I mean, their music was hardly heard at all, because you had largely Germanic figures running, basically running and programming the burgeoning American musical world. And, a lot of that, the native repertory just, wasn't regarded, I think, en masse as worthy of the great European masters. It's certainly a subject that we could, we could go on at length about. But just one last comment and question, which I'll throw out. So there is a wonderful biography of Amy Beach, which I certainly would recommend to all of our viewers, written by a terrific scholar who I knew, named Adrienne Fried Bloch. And she did really heroic work in the field, not only of Beach, but women in American music and American music in general. And her biography of Beach is beautifully titled. Kurt, it's called Passionate Victorian, which is, almost oxymoronic. But what do you think about that as a neat description of Beach's work?
Completely fitting. I mean, that describes. Well, I mean, the Victorian implies to me somewhat of restraint, and she just surpassed that. She pushed herself way past, and it's open, free, gorgeous, romantic music.
But still, I mean, there's a real sense of formalism to everything. You were saying in the conversation before our performance that she never brings it over the top.
Yeah, it's close. It's often close.
And those are the great moments.
That's true. Those are the ones I like the most, actually.
Well, seriously, right? It's that tension between this kind of, I mean, this really overheated, or at least heated intensity.
Yeah.
That never really breaks its bounds.
True. Yeah.
I remember the very, very first time I ever heard a recording of the Beach Quintet, and we get to that glorious, sublime second movement with its waves up and down and building and subsiding. And I'm thinking, every time it starts to build, my initial reaction on first hearing the piece was, oh no, she's gonna go off the rails, she's gonna go over the top, and she never does. The music pulls back, and then it relaxes for a second, and then it builds again, and she gets to the big climax at the end, and I'm just sort of waiting with bated breath. Again, the first time I ever heard the piece, and I'm thinking, no, don't do it, don't do it. And she never did. She holds it. I mean, the control is kind of magnificent. Anyway, I mean, we could certainly go on for for an hour about this really stunning piece of music and this extraordinary composer. I mean, to those of you viewing here, if you have a chance to poke around Amy Beach's repertoire, please do. There's an extraordinary body of work there that is just starting to become better known as we kind of search towards musical and societal equitability in the music world. It's her music is to be savored and treasured, and we were delighted to perform the piece. I just want to say a word before we go about our next program coming up, which is really reflective of what we like to think of the scan and the span of American music and what we in the Music from Copland House do, because we will now shift from the dawn of the 20th century to a piece that was just literally written. Copland House commissioned this piece from a really terrific and fascinating young composer named Annika Sokolovsky. And it's a piece that she wrote for our ensemble called To Sing of Sins. And our performance of it will be the virtual premiere. And that is, as usual with this series, on the fourth Monday of every month, May 24th, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We will be talking to Annika, and we have a special treat because the piece is actually inspired by and sort of incorporating some of the sounds of an extraordinary Irish folk singer named Jarla O'Leonard. And Jarla will join us for this program as well, for the introductory conversation before the performance and for the live Q&A afterwards. So Annika Sokolovsky's To Sing of Sins with Jarla O'Leonard and the Music from Copland House Ensemble, May 24th, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Please make a note of it in your calendars, and we look forward to joining you again next time. And for now, Jennifer and Kurt, thank you so much. It's been great spending time with you and talking about the wonderful Amy Beach. Thanks all. Bye-bye.